Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be looking at the Druid skill known as Fire Claws. So Fire Claws is a really interesting ability that has seen some revamp in the past couple patches, and basically what we're looking at now is kind of a different beast entirely from the previous Fire Claws, which had a huge number of synergies and quite honestly just was not the greatest choice, although it was workable. Now they have made it so that you only require 2 synergies. They have also made it so that the the Armageddon skill is no longer linked to the Hurricane tree, which is very interesting. And you can of course use it as a Werebear or as a werewolf. Depends on which way you would like to go. It really doesn't matter though. You can totally use either one. Now, I feel like it would be a bad idea not to talk about the Fire Claws in their respective forms. So, obviously, we have the werewolf form, and then we have the bear form. Now, the bear form offers significant advantages now over the werewolf form, and of course, the werewolf form also offers its own advantages to Fire Claws. When we are talking about Fire Claws, what are we talking about specifically? Well, we are talking about an ability which dishes out fire damage. It is a melee attack, which means that it can be combined with other melee type things. So like, for instance, chance to cast, which I just did a video on. You could definitely combine Fire Claws with a chance to cast build. You could also combine Fire Claws with Crushing Blow, Open Wounds, Deadly Strike, and a significantly high damage weapon, all of which could make Fire Claws into a very interesting choice. You could also theoretically go with a build for Fire Claws that just completely ignores all those things. I have actually seen people just take 6 shales and put them into a phase blade, and a 6 shaled phase blade attacks very quickly. One of the big downsides, though, of the 6 shaled phase blade for this particular build is that you are completely foregoing any physical damage in the process. And I feel like that's how do I want to put this? I feel like that's an oversight. That's a mistake, because if you have an ability like this that applies a large amount of elemental damage, you don't just want to lean into fire, because obviously you're going to come across fire immunes, and that's not something that you're going to be able to deal with if the only damage that you're outputting is fire. But if you are using a specific item that gives you Crushing Blow, Open Wounds, Deadly Strike, and you have a significant amount of physical damage in addition to the Fire Claws elemental damage, you can get off some very interesting things. There are also items in the game like the I believe it's called the Earth Shifter in D2. I think that's the one that I'm thinking of. It's the Thunder Maul that has the 25% chance to cast level 14 Fissure on striking. Which is very interesting and would provide Fire Claws an AoE type ability in addition to the single target fire damage. You could also combine this with other chance to cast items, like items that give Frozen Orb, or items that give static field procs, and very interesting things like that. I do think that the Earth Shifter Thunderball could make a very, very nice Fire Claws Druid weapon, especially since they have added it so that, of course, the Fire Claws Druid, or rather the how do I put it? The Druid Shapeshifting tree is now affected by external IAS, which is something that has another thing that has changed in the favor of Fire Claws, because that means that now you can utilize weapons that you might not have otherwise been able to before. The Earth Shifter Thunderball is a relatively slow weapon and would have been an extremely poor weapon before, when with the way that the Druid IAS worked. But now, with the way that they've changed the Druid IAS, it's an interesting choice. The other cool thing about the Fireclaws Druid is that, of course, as you build up Fireclaw synergies, you also build up the Armageddon synergy, and you could theoretically have Armageddon running alongside of your Fireclaws. So we could, for instance, have Armageddon while we are obviously in there, wailing away at targets. And as you can see, Fireclaws tends to do fairly well as long as there's no fire immunes. This is hell difficulty, but it is players 1, of course. Let's bump it up a little bit, shall we? To players 8. Oops. And let's go to the River of Flame. River of Flame is likely to have some fire immunes, and you'll see what I mean. So the two choices here between the Werewolf and the Werebear, by the way, are essentially a choice between speed, which may be the best choice for a Fireclaw Druid in general, just simply because you do want to attack faster, and uninterruptibility. The Werebear is now an uninterruptible monster. His attacks can no longer be interrupted. They are essentially unstoppable unless you kill the Werebear, which is very interesting. And they did up his damage and defense, as well as give him a rather nice buff to his Maul ability, which increases his attack speed as well when he is building up charges. As you can see, it goes up to 36% there on my level 18. And as you can see here, we've got some Urdars, and this is players 8. And even in players 8, as you can see, I'm still doing fairly well, especially considering this character is not geared up specifically to be a Fireclaws Druid. He's not really quite what I would pick as my main abilities. Like he's using a Windhammer Ogre Maul, for instance, whereas he could be using something else entirely. He could be using a faster weapon. He could be using a Grief. He could be using all sorts of different combinations of things to increase his damage, his speed even further. As you can see, the Werebear is not particularly fast. And let's switch over to the Werewolf, who is much faster. And as you can see with the Werewolf, my damage has increased pretty nicely because the fire damage that I'm dishing out has not changed, but the speed at which I'm attacking has changed. And this is essentially how Fireclaws is going to increase its damage, and which is why some people will use a 6-shelled Phaseblade. I don't particularly recommend that, and there's a couple reasons why I'm going to tell you not to do that. The first one is your life and Mana Steal are based on your physical damage. If you use a 6-shelled Phaseblade, you're going to have relatively low physical and physical damage, and as a result, you're going to have relatively low life and Mana Steal. And you're going to run into issues keeping your life and mana up, just in general, because your life and mana are going to constantly be draining, and you're not going to be replenishing them. It is an issue, and it's usually one of the reasons why I suggest you avoid low damage weapons that are just extremely fast. I don't necessarily advocate using a Windhammer Ogre Maul on a Fireclaws Druid. It just happens to be what I had. It's certainly not a terrible weapon at 50% crushing blow, and with a pretty decent physical damage as well. Even if I just went to my regular attack, you'll notice my physical damage is still particularly high with this particular item. Another thing that you can do with Fireclaws is you can add in other elemental abilities. So obviously what I was doing earlier was not really true to how an elemental druid might work. I could, of course, add in Armageddon. So let's do this again with Armageddon on as well. And Armageddon has been buffed recently quite a bit. Of course, he's immune to fire. Let's go ahead and take out everybody else first. And as you can see, I'm struggling against the immune to fire monsters. I don't even know if I have enough lifesteal to maintain myself here. One of the other issues with the way that Fireclaws works is, of course, it doesn't increase your physical damage. A lot of the times with other abilities, you have a way to increase that physical damage higher than what it would otherwise normally be, which means you can get more lifesteal out of something that you otherwise wouldn't. And there's no increase in physical damage at all with Fireclaws. Whereas if I were to use something like Feral Rage, which does have an increase in physical damage, although I may not be dishing out the amount of damage that I would want, you'll notice that I'm attacking faster and I can get off that lifesteal quicker. This is an issue with all elemental damage abilities, is that they just tend to not life and mana steal as much as they should. One of the things that I went over in the last video, the Vengeance video, was that Vengeance also has the same issue. Because Vengeance focuses so heavily on the elemental side, it really neglects the physical. Got a bug in my throat this morning, I swear. I keep having to pause the recording so that I can take a moment to take a sip of water and clear my throat. But you notice that even something as simple as switching to, like a Feral Rage can have a pretty nice effect on my my output. In fact, building up a Feral Rage before you initiate your Fire Claws might actually be a good idea. What I might suggest is putting something like Feral Rage on your off. They never stay, man, I swear. Like, put it on Z and then have Fire Claws on your main. And then what you would do is every now and then you would attack with a regular Feral Claws, the Feral Rage, to keep your buildup of extra physical damage, which can help tremendously in the life and mana steal situation. And as you can see, I'm much easier able to stay alive with no change in equipment. Just simply by adding in some Feral Rage into the situation. So, every time that I'm having an issue with life or mana steal, I switch off of course, the Fire Claws, which is the one that is going to give me the least amount of life and mana steal, and I switch over to something like Feral Rage, which can help bring my HP back up. And this is Player's 8, so keep in mind that even though I am struggling here, this is a Player's 8 struggle, which is definitely a lot different than struggling in Player's 1. If I took this character to a zone and walked around in Player's 1, you would notice a huge difference in the amount of kill speed that I can have in Player's 1 versus Player's 8. This character works surprisingly well in Player's 1, and I want to say that he functions decently in Player's 8. He's not, like, able to complete Player's 8 content with the speed of 8 players, but he's still doing fairly well. Let's go ahead and switch back to our werewolf form. And of course, these guys are immune to fire. And as you can see, because I have a physical damage weapon, it can actually dish out some damage. Despite the fact that I was using Fire Claws there, I was still able to dish out the damage that I needed to kill them. Here we have another situation where we're dishing out damage to monsters which are immune to physical. And this is going to be an issue, of course, because immune to physical monsters cannot be life stolen from. So I'm kind of in an issue where I might actually die. Just simply because there's no way for me to restore my life off of ghosts. Either I kill the ghosts before they kill me, or they kill me. And that's as simple as it goes. So as you can see, I was not able to out-DPS that many ghosts, and at the same time, I was not able to restore my life off of any of the monsters, except for the non-ghost monsters. Lifesteal, I think, is one of the biggest issues for any kind of elemental damage character, life and mana steal, and it might be where a skill like Hunger comes in, but everything that I've been told and for the longest time has basically been told that Hunger does not work. I don't know if they've ever fixed it, but every single time I talk about it or try to use it, or like say I'm leveling up a character and I'm like, oh, let me test out Hunger, because I'll find like a item that has plus Hunger on it. It doesn't seem to actually do anything. On top of that, it also nerfs your physical damage down by 75% instead of actually beefing it up. So if you're in a situation where you're already utilizing a weapon which has poor physical damage for Fire Claws, Hunger is not going to do you very much good either. Let me get my body back and let's go somewhere where there's not a horde of ghosts. Now, one of the things that, of course, you can do as a Fire Claws Druid is you can beef up your character in a myriad of ways. And what I mean by this is you can have other things, obviously, besides just Fire Claws. You could have, for instance, an Oak Sage, which I completely failed to summon last time while I was having some fun. You can also support yourself in other ways, like bringing up your HP through the Werebear instead of the Werewolf. In fact, let's go for a rematch now that we've got our Werebear and the Oak Sage running, because our HP is like at 3,000 now. Might be a little bit of a different situation. We'll go ahead and put Maul on our secondary here, and then we'll also grab our Armageddon. We'll have a rematch against the Ghosts. Oh, this guy's got conviction. What's up, buddy? What's up, suckers? And of course, they steal all my mana. And as they steal all my mana, I'm stuck in a situation where I can't put out the Fire Claws damage. At least with Fire Claws, it doesn't have the same issue that Vengeance does. Vengeance is like freaking 15 mana a cast, whereas Fire Claws is only 4. So you shouldn't have too much issue maintaining your mana, even if you're in a situation where somebody's sucking it all away. And of course, building up my maximum Maul comes in handy here, so I can get the extra attack speed. And I'll have to tap it every once in a while to make sure that I maintain that. One of the things you've got to do, though, is if you're going to do the Armageddon, you got to make sure you keep it up, and I'm not. As you can clearly see, I am not keeping the Armageddon up, which is a very sad thing. I'm like, okay, let me build Armageddon, and then let me just not cast it ever because I'm a genius. A genius! So, enough meandering. Let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this before I forget entirely. So Fire Claws specifically has 2 synergies, Firestorm and Molten Boulder. So you have to put 20 points into Molten Boulder and 20 points into Firestorm, which is a relatively minimal investment in the Fire Tree. If I was to reset my character here, you'll notice that to max out Fire Claws, all I've got to do is 20 points, 20 points, and then I need to build down to it. Unfortunately, to build down to it, you are going to need both forms. Because they force you to get both forms to build down to Fire Claws. And then you put 20 points into Fire Claws, and you have the maximum Fire Claws available to you. At this point, you are capable of going into either tree as a bear or as a werewolf, and you have a nice amount of skill points left to, you know, to build whatever you would want to build. My suggestion with a Fire Claws Druid would be to add in some stuns if you are a werewolf. If you are a bear, you could use Shockwave, which would be very, very helpful. The bear druid, the bear Fire Claws Druid gets the very nice attack speed and damage buff from Maul, and then also gets the Shockwave. Whereas the werewolf druid doesn't have any form of stun. You can, of course, put Feral Rage to beef up your physical damage as a Fire Claw Druid, but for stuns on a werewolf, I would recommend what you do is go ahead and grab Twister. Or sorry, what am I doing? You don't even need to do that. Go ahead and grab Arctic Blast. So 20 points into Arctic Blast. And you might be like, why am I putting 20 points into Arctic Blast? Well, the answer is that Twister has a very nice 20% duration per level for the stun duration, which brings the stun duration up to 2 seconds. You don't need to put any points in the Twister, but what you need to do is you need to put on a Carrion Wind. Or 2 Carrion Winds, whatever combination you want. And the Twisters that come out as you attack will stun targets for 2 seconds. And this will come in really handy as a werewolf Fire Claws Druid because you're going to be spamming stuns. You can also use the Rain armor, which I don't know if I have that handy. Sitting around. Do I not have a Rain armor sitting around? I do not. Rain also has Twister procs on it, and it also has Cyclone armor on it. Another thing you can do to make yourself more tanky is you can potentially put points into Cyclone armor itself. So Cyclone armor is a very nice ability that adds an absorption for elemental damage, fire, cold, and lightning. It basically absorbs damage based on the amount of the level and the synergy bonuses. It's a pretty hefty amount when you max it out. As you can see here, it's 1,705 damage at level 25 with the maximum synergies. But of course, as a Fire Claws Druid, you're probably not going to go down this side of the tree. It's probably not going to be what you're going to do. But at least putting a couple points into Cyclone Armor can be a huge boon to your character, just simply because you can cast it now while you're in bear form. It's going to protect you from a certain amount of elemental damage. It lasts forever until it is depleted, and you can recast it anytime you want. So it's really nice. The other interesting thing here is that if you are running the Rain Armor, which has a chance to proc the Cyclone Armor automatically, you don't have to put points into the ability. Instead, what you do is you put points into one of the synergies. So, for instance, if you were potentially doing the Twister build, you could, for instance, do Max Arctic Blast, Max Twister, and actually, I'm sorry, not Max Twister. Sorry, Max Arctic Blast, and then what you would do is something like Max Hurricane, which would be an interesting combination. And why would you do that specifically? Well, what this does is it gives a synergy damage bonus to Twister. It also gives the stun duration bonus to Twister, so that your carrying wind Twisters are going to be hitting harder than they otherwise normally would. And I mean, it's an interesting way that you can go about it. Ooh, I did not mean to do that. Another thing that you can do here is, obviously, if you have Hurricane, you could be casting Hurricane while you're running around. Now, it might not do the amount of damage that the Hurricane otherwise normally would, but keep in mind that Hurricane, even in its crappy form, still applies a cold damage to everything around it, which could be handy to keep the monsters, under control as you're trying to beat the crap out of them. Hurricane lasts for quite some time if you build up the synergies, but doesn't last a really long time if you don't build up the synergies, and that's one of the downsides to it. So as you can see, it only lasts 30 seconds in this particular form, whereas if we wanted to beef up the synergies, we would have to beef up Cyclone Armor. So it's an interesting interconnected thing between all the abilities, and it's important to note that if you're looking to build a Fire Claws Druid, there is a lot of options. Just so many various options on how you can get it done, how you can make it an amazing build. Another thing that you're going to have to worry about with a Fire Claws Druid is, of course, because Fire Claws Druids are elemental based, you are going to probably want to put some type of negative fire resistance on. The new Flickering Flame helmet, for instance, has negative fire res on it. There are some various choices. You can also go with items like the new Plague Sword, which has lower resistance on it, Infinity, which has conviction. You can be running, a myriad of pieces of equipment that will beef up your Fire Claws abilities. Let me show you a Flickering Flame real quick. I actually made one just the other day for my online ladder character, Godzilla. He has finally started to get all his equipment, and I'm actually excited to say that he has a mercenary who is running a Flickering Flame now, which is very, very fun. I still haven't sorted out all his equipment yet, but eventually he will be running Flickering Flame, Plague, and some other very nice choices. This is Flickering Flame, by the way, and as you can see, it has negative 15% enemy fire resistance, +3 to fire skills, as well as a very nice level 6 resist fire aura. And as you can imagine, if you were to put this in a very nice Druid pelt with appropriate plus to skills, like for instance, let's say you found a +3 Fire Claws Druid pelt, you would have a +6 Fire Claws Druid pelt. You could also potentially put this with other things, like you could have plus Fire Claws plus Armageddon, and you could get +6 to Armageddon. You could also run, Molten Boulder, Fissure, all sorts of interesting things like that could be put on here. You could also utilize this as a way to get, maybe like a Grizzly Bear. as an extra tanking mechanic or something like that. There are a 1,000, if not more, ways that you could possibly configure a flickering flame helmet for a Fireclaw's Druid, and I believe the negative 15% enemy fire resistance is going to help out the Fireclaw's Druid tremendously. In fact, I would imagine that a optimal setup for a Fireclaw Druid would probably look something like a flickering flame in a very nice pelt, combined with a plague sword, probably in a two-handed weapon. Something that hits and smacks pretty hard, that still has some decent speed, and because you don't want to completely forgo the physical, but you do want to have a faster weapon. Druids do get a two-handed weapon bonus, so when they are wielding two-handed weapons, the two-handed weapons actually show a much greater speed than they would otherwise, which is definitely something that's very interesting. And like, for instance, if I look at a two-handed weapon, the two-handed weapon is going to have a much slower speed for me as a paladin. But when that same two-handed weapon goes to a druid, it's going to be a much faster item. You could also, theoretically, on a budget, you could use Medusa's Gaze as a shield that gives lower resistance procs. That would definitely help out a Fireclaw's Druid a lot. But don't completely neglect the physical portion of your Fireclaw's Druid either. Put on items that have things like Deadly Strike, that have things like Crushing Blow, Open Wounds. These things can be extremely effective to take down the HP of monsters, so that the fire isn't the only aspect that you're dishing out. Remember that it's ideal. It's less than ideal to only have one element, okay? You'd never want to only have one element. You never want to be only physical damage. You never want to be only fire damage. You never want to be only ice, only lightning, only this, okay? And if you have the ability to be two elements, then be two elements. If you're a Fireclaw's Druid who also has a physical aspect to your character, then beef up the physical aspect to your character too. So work on things like I said earlier, Crushing Blow, Open Wounds, Deadly Strike. Get yourself a weapon that actually hits hard enough so that when you're attacking with your Fireclaws, that if you run across a fire immune monster, you can dish out damage to them as well. Take my God Zealer, for instance. This is the character that I'm on right now. He is currently running 3 elements. He has physical damage, he has lightning damage, and he also has holy bolt damage in the form of the principal armor and the laying of hands and bramble mitts. So basically what's happening is that at any given time, at any given monster that I come across, if the monsters are immune to my elements, I always have 1 or 2 other elements to fall back on to allow myself to dish out damage to those targets. And that's what you're looking for when a Fireclaw's Druid. You want to build him in a way that allows him to bypass immunities when he comes to them. As always, I do appreciate it when you guys and gals watch my videos. If you have any questions specifically about Fireclaws, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Druid is probably not my greatest topic or my greatest class as far as knowledge goes on Diablo 2 Resurrected, but I do know enough about them that I could probably lead you in the right direction as far as what you're looking for. Keep in mind, like I said before, that the shape-shifting tree in general is now affected by external IAS. So having items like Laying of Hands and like Andariel's Visage and things like that and Treachery actually do affect the attack speed of your attacks now. So building a Fireclaw's Druid has never been more interesting than it is currently. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and keep watching.